Hello and welcome back. Today I want to talk about credibility in research. Credible research is something that's come up recently in professional discourse, and so I thought I would just sort of lean gently into it today. Like me, I'm sure that you're fascinated by the patterns that you see in your children's learning. Many years ago, as a young teacher noticing these patterns, I saw students who had struggled in school were suddenly making accelerated progress, and they'd say things like this: "My reading's got better since I started these lessons with you. My dad says to tell you my reading's really changed. It's amazing." Now, the thing is that I was not teaching reading. I was teaching them how to play the cello. And today, I'm sharing how I went from noticing patterns to researching them. Teachers would tell me that their low retaining pupils who had behaviour issues had caught up with the others in the class and were working quietly. They'd say things like this: "I never have a problem with them anymore." And then there was this from one teacher about a whole group of children in her class. "They've transformed," she said. "But," she continued, "it was maturation, nothing to do with what you've been doing." So my musician colleagues, when I discussed this with them, advised me to drop the idea. They said to me rhythm was all about counting, not reading. I mulled all of this over, and eventually somebody else said to me, "This is a research project. This is exactly why people do research." Now, research is the last thing that I was expecting to hear. And I wondered how I'd meet a researcher and persuade them to answer the questions I had. I was reading everything I could find on this topic, but I still had no answers. Eventually, I realized that the only way to tackle this was to do the research, and I saw myself as a very unlikely fit for the role. You see, I was a musician. I'd been trained at the Royal Academy of Music, and I had no academic background. So I trembled as I walked up the steps of UCL's Institute of Education in London. I had a bunch of case studies ready for inspection by the professors there. And then 2 hours later, I walked down the same steps, ready to join the MA in music education with the option of later applying for a PhD. People often ask me how I managed to fit this in around working full time and also raising my children. You see, I set and met reading goals every single day, and I wrote all the assignments at night. So if one of my cello students would arrive, say, 5 minutes late for their individual music lesson with me, I'd by then have read 10 pages of a book in that time. These intense, short bursts of reading supercharged my teaching because the text that I took around with me was so relevant to what I was doing. And of course, as we all know, when principles and practice meet, inspiration follows. So reading and teaching became symbiotic, and the MA led to the PhD. When I began the doctoral training, I was so surprised to meet so many people with absolutely no idea about their topic, but they had pretty detailed knowledge about all the isms and the ologies of researching. Whereas for me, it was different. I knew exactly what I wanted to investigate. Some people there worried that I was too close to my topic and said that I needed to be more detached. It seemed inevitable that researcher effects would derail me. All the research that anyone does has limitations, and of course, this is why rigor and scrutiny are absolute priorities for research. So, how can educational researchers address limitations? There are many powerful approaches that strengthen educational research so that it becomes as objective as possible. One of these is to triangulate the research. So I invite teachers to rate a child's progress and to make comments. Another way that I do this is to do it repeatedly so that class teachers in one school have an opportunity to observe patterns developing over a longer period of time, 3 years or so. And this is a good way for them to test whether any effects are reliable, rather than just being a one-off or a coincidence. Triangulating the data means that the voices of the children and the teachers are collected and presented as data that complements the standardized reading assessment scores that I collect. The extent to which these different sources of information intersect helps to put flesh on the bones of the reading assessments, and it means that I've included data representing the children's progress in the classroom. All of the teachers that I work with bring professional judgment to this process, as well as their own preconceptions about strategies and interventions, and these can range from being really open-minded to being cautious or even reluctant. If teachers participate in a project like mine over several years, their professional judgments can become more nuanced. I've seen this because sometimes I see a really rapid change in teachers' responses after only one iteration of the project, whereas for others it might take longer. For instance, one teacher new to my work warned me that he'd made copies of his feedback and would check it when he read my final report. 2 years and 4 iterations later, he was far more relaxed when I asked him for feedback. He laughed as he shook his head, and this is what he said: "Look, this is amazing. I mean, it always works, doesn't it? I'd love to see what you're doing." So in educational research, it's important to narrow down as many variables as possible and to conduct the research in a realistic way. For example, it's realistic to control for group size in an intervention because this impacts the children's engagement, and it might also provide useful data about their learning day to day. It's not realistic to control for the school being inspected during the research because although this would impact the setting and the delivery of the intervention, an inspection is something of a rarity. However, that said, almost all of the schools I worked in a centrally funded project were inspected within the same half term while I was delivering the intervention. But also, being specific is really key. Rhythm, for example, helps children with weak phonological awareness, weak working memory, weak comprehension, and weak attention. It does not resolve acuity issues. So, for example, if children need to wear glasses or hearing aids or do not yet speak English, an intervention like rhythm is not going to actually help with those things. Rhythm does help with confidence though. So when children become disaffected because phonics drills have not worked, reading musical notation instead of letters and words offers a really fast and alternative way to build attention, sharpen decoding skills, and cultivate fluency that complements the traditional methods of teaching early reading. The idea that an alternative, simpler symbol system can make a difference in only 10 minutes a week may be regarded as implausible. There are, however, many deeper reasons why low-retaining children respond quickly to this approach, and they're all rooted in the reward system of the brain and also executive functions and how all of this interacts. Even though our modern minds might immediately reject the idea of a fast-acting process, these practices were known and documented by the Macedonians, and all of those who followed their example and continue to do so in formal training today. So let's just wrap this up now. Credible essentially means believable. If research becomes a creed, then it logically follows that it will be shaped subjectively by professional preconceptions, perceptions, and even unconscious bias. Different settings also shape people's perceptions to such an extent that some people will see things differently depending on the person they are speaking with. For example, in a room where everyone agrees with a charismatic leader, it's unlikely that anyone in that room will voice their personal views unless they have calculated that their words would be approved by the leader. And of course, this can shut down healthy debate. Alternatively, in a room where there are two sides to a vibrant debate, each person will add their perspective only to strengthen the case for the side they support. But no one in that room will argue for a compromise because the goal is to win the argument. Winners continue to win, and in education, they tend to be the more privileged, whether they represent regions, cities, neighbourhoods, families, or of course, children. In Rhythm for Reading, what I'm trying to do is to look after the disadvantaged children. And of course, I'm instantly cast not as a winner particularly, but more as somebody who's looking for compromise. So I would say that Rhythm for Reading offers an approach that complements the traditional approaches that work for privileged children. If you'd like to find out more, please do join me on my next webinar, which is all about the reward system. I hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye.